When we dance together, my world's in disguise. It's a fairyland tale that's come true. And when you look at me with those stars in your eyes, I could waltz across Texas with you. Waltz across Texas with you in my arms. Waltz across Texas with you. Like a storybook ending, I'm lost in your charms, and I could waltz across Texas with you. Oh, buddy, now. And Blondie now. Troubles are just up and gone the moment that you come in view. And with your hand in mine, dear, I could dance on, and I could waltz across Texas with you. Waltz across Texas with you in my arms. Waltz across Texas with you. Like a storybook ending, I'm lost in your charms, and I could waltz across Texas with you.
It's time for Fort Worth Musical Moments. Join us now as Steve Markward takes a look at the music and the artists who made the city's vibrant musical legacy what it is today. Well, welcome into Fort Worth Musical Moments. I'm Brent Adams, the host of the Tractors and Troubadours national radio show and podcast, along with my co-host and singer-songwriter Steve Markwart. And hey, thank you to everybody who's patiently waiting for us here. Little technical difficulties on this end here today, but we're finally here. And boy, are we excited about this one. Steve, how are you, my friend?
Good. We're going to blame today's delay on last night's storm. How's that?
Well, last night's storm for you, where you sit, is knocking on my door right now. So another programming note: if you see me running for the hills or disappear at some point today, that's why. It's definitely an odd day around here, and I know it is down in Nashville, Tennessee, where our special guest is today, and we're excited to have him here. He's a torchbearer for one of my musical heroes, and a guy who, without question, is one of the best musical ambassadors Texas ever had. It's my honor to welcome into the program Ernest Dale Tubb III, better known to his family and friends as Dale Tubb. And Dale, welcome into the program.
Hey, bro, appreciate you having me.
And we ought to note his audio sounds a little bit different here today. He's actually coming through the phone line because we were having some issues on the software end today, but we can hear his voice, we can see him here, and we are definitely glad to have him on here, because I've been watching over the past few months as you've really worked your tail off here to preserve the legacy of that old Texas troubadour. And as I told Steve, we can't have a show about great moments in Fort Worth's musical history without discussing Ernest Tubb. After all, it's pretty much where it began for him, and we're going to get into that legacy in a moment. But before we do, tell us a bit about yourself and how you kind of found yourself in the position you're in to kind of pick up the mantle here for your grandfather.
Yeah, I'm obviously live in Nashville, Tennessee. I was named after Granddad. My dad's Junior. A lot of people know him as Tinker. But we live here in Nashville. We got 2 boys, my wife Ashley and I. Our oldest son is Ernest the fourth, and then we've got Tommy, and we've got another boy on the way the beginning of May. So
Congratulations on that. That's awesome.
Appreciate that. Yeah, and I kind of got into this. I don't want to say randomly. I've been in communication with David McCormick for years, with the interest of getting involved with the shop. The older I got, the more I started to really understand the legacy, I guess you could say, that was left by Granddad in the store, and the impact on music. So, it's changed hands a couple times, and it was, kind of came to be, I guess, for sale or available again, right? So I got teamed up with some really good guys that I met with through some residential stuff that I was involved in. And it was a lot of calls, a lot of conversations, but we got the deal put together and got it done last July. So it's been a lot. It's been a handful. A lot of folks just think it's just the building downtown. Well, there's a lot more to it. You've got the mail order business that been around for as long as the store. You've got the Midnite Jamboree, which is that live broadcast. So as everything kind of comes together on the building side, to not lose, I guess, the public attention and the rallying around the closure of the shop, I kicked off the Midnite Jamboree back out at the Troubadour Music Valley. And, David was integral in getting that kicked up. And Jeannie Seeley played a big part in that. And Rodney Collins, the guy who's running the Troubadour at this point, was very gracious with his space and his enthusiasm to help get it up back and running and getting it. We're not perfect, but it's every weekend we learn something new. I don't come from the music background as far as employment, so I have to really lean on the people around me to help me get it where we want to get it.
Well, we're talking about honoring the legacy of a guy who was inducted into the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame in 1970 and the Country Music Hall of Fame in 1965, and was one of the biggest stars of his day. So that legacy definitely needed to be preserved. What was it that you talked about as you grew older that you saw that need here? What was it about that, especially as you sit there in Nashville and kind of see Nashville changing and kind of shoving aside some of the legacy there and some of the history of what built the city? What was it in you that said, "Hey, we got to keep this thing going here"?
Well, it's when you look at most things right now, people only look at the surface of what they see, right? And if I hate to use the proverbial peel the onion back, but if you look at how did this city get where it's at, and being in Nashville, there's actually a lot going on here. There's major healthcare mecca. We're starting to turn into a tech mecca with Oracle and Amazon. But music, everybody automatically associates with the music city. And it's not always been glitz and glamour. I mean, when you look at Granddad's career, it was hard, man. It was 280 dates a year on a sometimes not air conditioned bus. Play a show in Arkansas, cut through Nashville, play the Opry, do the Midnite Jamboree, get back on the bus and head to Pennsylvania for a matinee the following day. So it was a grind. And the pay scales, I don't think the pay scales were anywhere near where they're at now. So it's I think educating people on how did we get here, because I'm not discounting any of the current artists that are top 10 performers today. They're very talented, but it was a rough road that was paved to make the comforts and the luxuries available to them today.
Right. Well, that road for Ernest Tubb started in Crisp, Texas, which is no longer there, but later moved on throughout Texas and Spent some time in San Antonio, KONO radio, kind of where folks first heard him first, and then he ended up in Fort Worth. And Steve, it was kind of there that legacy was really begun, wasn't it?
Yeah, like we were talking about the other day, it's but based on what we know, that his Ernest's career kind of paralleled Bob Wills and Milton Brown when they launched about 10 years earlier out of Fort Worth. And what they had in common, one of the many things they had in common, was they had a flour company kind of behind them, boosting them. Again, I know the Bob Wills and those guys had that light crust dough, the Burris Mills Flour Company. Tell me again the name of the flour company that Ernest had behind.
Yes, the Gold Chain Enriched Bleach Flour Mills, and he was branded the Gold Chain Troubadour.
Gold Chain Troubadour. Yeah. Well, yeah. And so, do we know how much time he spent here before? I think this is kind of a trajectory for him to hit nationwide, right?
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but 40 through 42, I believe, is when he did those shows with the station there, KGKO, and 1941 wrote "Walking the Floor Over You," and then recorded that in Dallas, and 400,000 copies of that sold in the first year, which was a huge deal back in those days. And Dale, that's kind of where it launched, huh?
Yeah, but and you say that, 400,000 in today's, measurements, everybody's like, well, that's not very much, but you got to think where the country was in 41. We're in the middle of World War II.
Right.
So there was, distribution was scarce. The actual materials that pressed those records, which would have been 78, a lot of those materials were earmarked for the war.
Right.
So it's kind of amazing, for him to hit those kind of numbers. And if you look at his career and you look at the songs that he wrote in that era, if it wasn't for the war and the lack of materials and supplies to press and folks being laid out of work and not being able to afford records, how many would he really have sold?
Right.
Well,
and it's impressive to think that he was trying to build a career during that time period, but by the same token, it was also kind of what folks needed as a release to get away from some of the stress and pressures of what they were seeing on a day-to-day basis, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
And you look at songs like Filipino Baby and just the impact that they had just on the culture at that time, coming out of World War II there. And then you kind of move on to 1947, the first group of folks to go play Carnegie Hall to represent country music. September 18th and 19th, 1947, when he joined a group from the Grand Ole Opry to present music at Carnegie Hall. And man, when you think about your legacy there, that it doesn't get any better than that, does it?
No, yeah, and it's really cool to think because you hear the story about he walked out on stage, and you've got a lot of folks from the north that weren't used to what was considered hillbilly music back then, and I think it's been quoted. One of the opening lines he said was, "Boy, this place sure would hold a lot of hay," because he's used to playing and honky tonks. And you look at some of the venues that were played in the 40s, 50s, 60s across the Midwest. I mean, they were nothing like today, right? I mean, it was little dance halls.
And those pictures came from a little place called the Library of Congress. So, not bad when you can have your history preserved there.
Yeah, I've actually got the original playbill in a frame that his longtime fan club president made for him.
Wow. Yeah, you bring up the fan club, and I showed that picture earlier of the plaque in what was Crisp, Texas. There, that's one thing about this. Last month would have been his 109th birthday. He was on the road and a touring act for many years, but he passed in 1984. and there's still such this huge popularity for this music, and that's really exciting to see.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think it's as much of his music as it was the steward of the industry that he was. You know, he really helped people. You know, you hear, I mean, you can't talk about him without hearing a story about how he would have given somebody the shirt off of his back or got somebody introduced where they needed to get introduced. So, you know, it's such a rarity now, because, you know, you look at the way stars are managed today and stuff, you can't get anywhere within 10 feet of them, you know?
I was watching a documentary, brushing up on my Ernest Tubb knowledge, and digging a little deeper myself, and a lot of interesting things on this documentary. They interviewed a lot of different people that had played with your grandfather through the years, and they all had great stories to tell, and some of them were funny. But you know, there was some people said, well, you know, his singing's not that, you know, he's not like a Caruso or anything like that. But it was so much more than just, you know, in what was explained and what I know too, just from my experience, it was so much more than just his vocal delivery. It was the whole presentation and how he delivered the songs. And you know, he kind of stuck to a formula that worked for him as a musician. He stayed in the key of C mostly, you know, because that's where his voice was most complimentary. And he had these musicians that were rock solid. And I can't remember, perhaps you can tell me his lead guitar player, what was his name?
Leon Rhodes.
There's a couple. Yeah, Leon Rhodes is probably the most well known.
Yeah, and so and if you listen to that, and you know, that's iconic, and it's a kind of a trademark of his. You know, that sound. He was one of the first to use that amplified steel guitar or amplified electric guitar, and he used it very well. And you know, and so it was the whole presentation. And yes, like you said, Dale, from a lot of the stories in that documentary talked about how he helped so many people, and how he was so fan friendly, probably the most fan friendly artist of his time and maybe ever. Never hesitated to stop and sign autographs, talk to his fans, and you'd mentioned his president of his fan club. Is that the lady that's been doing that for years and years? That's still out there?
It's Norma Barcel's the one I'm making reference to. For some reason, I'm thinking she's passed away, but I would have to think, because you got to think Granddad's been gone 39 years.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure that Norma passed away, but she was his fan club president forever.
One of the other stories I heard too, it's a funny story, and gosh, I wish I could remember the name of the guy who joined the band at some point. And he was saying, you know, I never was a hat wearing guy, you know, because we're talking about the whole visual presentation that Ernest Tubb and the Texas Troubadours, you know, portrayed. I mean, impeccably dressed to the nines. But this guy was saying, you know, I never cared for wearing hats. And so I thought I'd approach Ernest and say, hey, Ernest, you know, is there any way we can get away, the band can get away without wearing hats? And he goes, yeah, there's a way you can get away without wearing hats. And he's thinking, wow, that was easy. And then Ernest looked at me seriously. He goes, just don't be in the band. So
yeah. I mean, they kind of coined that look, the turned up sides. And, you know, there's a few artists out there nowadays, you know, the Malthus brothers, really, if you guys follow them at all, they look like troubadours.
Yeah.
Right.
They dress just like it.
So much of this legacy came out of Nashville, especially from 1943 on. But how important was Texas and Fort Worth to his legacy, and how important are those Texas ties to your family today?
Yeah, I mean, I think Texas is his heart, because you know, I mean, I travel for work a lot, and when I fly in, anytime I've ever flown into Texas, man, when I'm getting my boarding pass checked or something, somebody always makes a comment of my name. And you know, Nashville's where he really expanded his career, right, nationwide. But his heart was always in Texas, you know. And his I don't want to say there's not loyal fans in Tennessee and all over the country, but it's a different thing when you go to Texas and mention that name, Ernest Tubb. Like you said, he was such a steward for the state, promoting the state, and when his early career, I mean, he did so much recording there and so much touring there. I think I think that's kind of always home. Nashville, somehow Dallas, you would think Dallas with the size would be the Mecca, but with the Grand Ole Opry being tied into Nashville, that was the the stage that broadcast nationwide. So that's what brought all the artists here.
Right.
Yeah. There's a song that Porter Wagner wrote, I think, for your grandfather, for Ernest, and I can't remember the name of it, but the lyrics are something like, "I may be in Tennessee, but at the Longhorn Ballroom in Dallas, they call me the Texas Troubadour," and
Oh yeah.
and Kurt Ryle, who's been on this show and is a partner of ours, runs Clarksville Creative Sound out of Clarksville, Tennessee. Kurt was part of that house band at the Longhorn Ballroom in Dallas for years, and remembers when Ernest would come through there and he would back him up. He said that was one of the most thrilling moments for us to have a guy like him on stage with us.
Oh, you hear Granddad call out that Longhorn Ballroom. I mean, Dewey Groove.
Yeah.
So he's he played Texas so much, and I think that as he moved to Nashville, obviously the family, I want to say, dispersed in different directions, right? We have still family on Granddad's side in Texas. Talmadge, who was part of that commemorative Martin guitar push back in 2003. I know his family's still all in Texas, but I mean, it's expanded. Justin Tubb, his sons are here in Nashville, and their kids have moved. There's some of those folks in East Tennessee. So, he cast a wide net.
All right. What was it like for your family just growing up, with such strong ties to the country music world? I mean, was it something you were always cognizant of coming up?
Not really at all, to be honest. I go by Dale, and that's my middle name, and I think it was really done gives the attention. When you put a kid or young folks in the call it spotlight, right? You don't know how they're going to react. You don't want to kind of put that kind of pressure on kids. I think was the thought process with my mom. So we were aware, but I didn't get introduced into the significance of anything probably until high school. Mm-hmm. And then I went off to Mississippi and went to college and came back, and it's funny. I was talking to my wife one night from my then girlfriend, and said, I want to be a part of the shop. We got to carry this legacy. And this was getting connected with David on the conversation initially. And I look back, and my first email to David was, I believe it was 2014. So, I was a kid at the time, and it was a lot of change between now and then. But I guess long answer short, we weren't really brought up in the business because Granddad was really the family's connection to the music business. And once he passed, it kind of the flame got a little dim, right?
Right.
So that's the hopes of what I'm working on now is, I've got to explain to my son and possibly his son, who you're named after and why that's something you should be proud of.
What would you think every time you went down to Lower Broadway and saw that iconic storefront with that sign with his picture on it, though? That had to be pretty special.
Oh yeah, it's really cool, man. It's we used to go down to concerts down on the riverfront, and that was always a rendezvous point to get picked up. The family's not been involved in the shop. As David was the ambassador for it for many years and did a wonderful job. But we weren't involved. It was something that David kind of took the reins of after Granddad's passing. So.
Right. Yeah, we definitely want to say shout out. I don't know if he's watching today, but definitely a special man. and carried on that legacy so long. He was a right-hand man to your grandfather, and then purchased the shop on his death in 1984, and ran it dutifully for so many years through so many changes. I was just thinking the other day about the fact that he purchased the store in '84, and you think about where that is. I mean, kind of already. Vinyl was starting to fade. Everybody was listening to cassette tapes, and now all of a sudden CDs are coming in, and it wasn't too long before digital streams started coming in. So I mean, everybody was experimenting with all this different technology, and that's hard to keep up with.
Well, and it's when you talk about the David McCormick era of the record shop, it's pretty amazing. He started with one location, expanded out to Music Valley with store number 2. Then you had the store there in Fort Worth, which is now, I believe, Chief Records.
Right.
You had the Pigeon Forge location. You had Branson, Missouri, and these were not franchises. These were David planting roots in the areas in which performers like Granddad were still playing, and the fan bases were very, very strong. So, I think when you look at I'll call it a scale back, you're exactly right. Records, vinyl, retired to cassette, to CDs, and then you digitize it with downloads, that basically takes the inventory out of these brick and mortars. I mean, how do you support them?
Right.
And that's, and David did a wonderful job. 52 years, he dedicated his time and his passion to this, and he's still very passionate about it.
Right. And I think that's,
I think it's a true testament to the impact Granddad left on David, because there's not many people that I can think of that I know that would dedicate 52 years to anything.
Absolutely. Well, and I think it's important to point out too, I mean, the folks who are operating Chief Records now in that space, it used to be the Ernest Tubb Record Shop there in Fort Worth. They're doing a great job of it, and it was named to honor the legacy of Ray Price and the Cherokee Cowboys. But and as good as a standalone shop, but the reason that scale back that you talked about happened is because of the change, and because people just weren't buying as much, and financially, some tough decisions had to be made. But I think there was some people who thought that they were abandoning the stockyards and abandoning Fort Worth, which was such an important part of the legacy. But it just wasn't like that, was it?
No, I just think it was, it's kind of like the shop today. I get a lot of questions, as you can imagine. Is it going to be this? What's the plans? And the plan is to keep the legacy alive. It's going to be different because the economic factors in downtown Nashville demand and require it.
Right.
It's just like Chief. I've actually been at a Chief. It's probably 5 or 7 years ago. I was there on a work call, and I actually purposely stayed by the stockyard so I could go see it, and had a great conversation with the new ownership. And it looked a lot like it did when it was the Ernest Tubb Record Shop.
Right.
And those guys are doing a great job, and it really just boils down to it's sometimes you just gotta unfortunately make some sacrifices to save. You gotta shed the herd to save the cow, right? I mean, I don't know how to put that, but it's
right.
Compartmentalizing all of the locations back and abroad was really a requirement to keep it alive, keep it going.
Right. Well, I'm sure you get a lot of questions about that, and I know I've heard quite a bit about that. What does the long-term future of the record shop property there on Broadway look like?
Well, it's you look at the transaction, and I'm in banking, so I'll try to be as understanding as possible, I guess you could say. You've got to utilize every square inch of that building. When you look at debt service on a purchase like that, for example, you've got to put a business model in front of a lender that's going to get them excited about loaning that money out, right? So there is going to be a record shop in one of those floors. And it's, the idea is to take everything that is in existence inside the shop today and reuse it. We will actually have some stuff we'll add to it to make it. I don't want to call it a museum, because if you think about when you walk in it, it's kind of a museum.
Right.
You've got some retail there, you've got some light merchandise, I'd say, some CDs. But the majority of why people walk in there is to look at all that stuff on the wall. All the suits, all the boots, the belt buckles, all the pictures over a 75-year span of a business operating. It's like stepping back in time. Yeah. I think the goal is to put a new flavor on that, because at the end of the day, you've got, for the longevity of the brand, you've got to attract a new generation.
Right.
And I used to have some records, and I talked to a guy about, Elvis Stunt albums, right? The 45, highly desired records for collectors. Well, let's say the 45 is worth $500 today. In 20 years, that might be a $10 record, because everybody that wanted it doesn't want it. So it's a supply demand thing, right? If you've got 100 people wanting it, the price is higher, versus one person wanting it, they're going to tell you what they're going to pay.
Right.
So you've got to evolve it. And the cool thing is, like with the resurgence of vinyl, you're starting to see people look into the history of country music a little more than I think they have. Because if you look at some of the current, top 10 hot artists, they're really paying homage to the classics.
Right.
So it's just like shoes. Everything recycled.
Right. Well, I sit here, I was thinking about the other day, when you think about artists such as Willie Nelson and Merle Haggard and Lefty Frizzell and George Jones, who are legends in their own right. And then you think about even our friend Kurt Riles' old boss, Vern Gosden, later Jamie Johnson, singing Set 'Em Up Joe, which is all about someone drowning their sorrows while playing Walking the Floor. There was such a deep appreciation of that generation that came after your grandfather's generation, that always kind of harken back to that music. And just so important that this next generation understands where all this came from.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, because you go down to Broadway right now, and people are like, "Oh, the legends," and it's funny to me. I guess it means you're getting old, right? When legends are Alan Jackson.
Right.
I'm like, I remember when Alan Jackson was singing Boot Scoot Boogie, right?
Right.
When I turn on the radio and it's the oldies is playing the stuff I grew up listening to. So I think I think you'll continue to see ties back to that. I mean, I think the record shop is honestly a portal into the past, because you're always, the new artists are going to sing about the Merles and the Willies and Johnny Paychecks and so forth. Rightfully so, right? Because those are the legends to their generation.
Right.
And if the people that are really interested will find the history, and I think those people will always be out there. But the record shop to me is kind of ground zero, because if you look at the revitalization of downtown, even over the last 15 years, it's almost unrecognizable.
Yeah. Even over the last 5 years, it's almost unrecognizable.
No, I mean, me and my wife were driving down Broadway last weekend for her birthday dinner, and we came from West End. And when you eclipse that hill and you start rolling towards the beginning of Lower Broad, it looks like Los Angeles.
Right.
It's glass towers. You used to be able to nearly see clear to Broadway. Not at all.
Right. Well, as you're getting through all that here, trying to sort out what will become of the 417 Broadway property, you have really plunged your heart and soul over this past year into breathing some new life into the Midnite Jamboree, which stands as the second longest running country music radio show, only behind the Grand Ole Opry. What's the strategy for making sure that legacy continues, and how can country music fans get involved to do their part?
Yeah, I think like with the shop, it's a 2-part deal, right? The Jamboree kind of the heart of Saturday night. So you trace back the history of it being somewhat of an encore to the Opry, but it was also a platform for new artists to get exposed.
Right.
Dial further back into Granddad's, a lot of his legacy is helping up and coming artists. So, we launched that out at Music Valley because the venue's set up great. That's where David was actually hosting it for the last 20 plus years. Free parking, and there's been some changes to it. Rodney's done a great job building out a bar, and they've got a kitchen serving food. So it's really a performance venue. And I think that, my long-term goal of it is for it to be a platform for artists that, like I talked to my dad a couple of days ago, and he said, the Jamboree was really your last stop before you played the Opry.
Right.
And that's where we'd like to get back to, but the business has changed so much. It's like, people are like, why don't you get this person to play it or that person? And the reality is a lot of the times where they play is not up to them anymore. You're working through, management and record labels and things. And so there's a lot of business intricacies to this business that did not exist. When you look at, we worked really hard on the sound of the Troubadour, and our sound engineer, John, and the house engineer, Barry, have been working their tails off to get everything right from the sound standpoint. And I laughed because I was like, guys, Granddad did this thing in 1960, flying by the seat of his pants, and it sounded great. But there's just so much technology in it today. And I literally called WSM. I said, how are we having this download, this file input issue? And, and I said, how did Granddad do it in 1960? He said they literally would drag cables across Broadway from the Ryman, and that's how they would live broadcast. So envision like pretty much an extension cord hanging across Broadway, plugging up into the PA and the board at the record shop.
Well, evidenced by the fact that it took us an extra 15 minutes to get this thing going today. Technology isn't always our friend. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah. We're trying, we laugh, we're trying to keep it simple.
Right.
But then you've got, different technology with each artist, but it's growing. Like this weekend, we've got Mark Wills. He's going to put on a great show. We've had some awesome artists, T. Graham Brown, and we had Tim Watson, the fiddle man. He had the place going wild. So it's super interesting because I've never been involved in that side of music either. So I'm learning about sound. I'm learning about booking talent. It's a lot.
And Steve, you can speak to that with a lot of what you guys are trying to do down there with National Hall in Texas. It's not easy pulling it all together, is it?
No, it's not. It's not. Well, at National Hall, this is a 100-year-old hall, and they've never had their own sound system in there. So anytime you go in there with a band, you got to hire a sound guy to bring in all the equipment. And I had about 2 or 3 times of that and thought, I'd love to make this place my home base, but we got to have a sound system that we can rely upon, and that we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time we come in, because it took 3 or 4 hours just to get the sound set up. So that's what we're doing, is financing a really good sound system to put in there, and then in return we're going to get use of the hall and kind of establish a home base there and bring in a lot of the artists on our label and the CMA of Texas organization as well. And we hope to be doing some live broadcasting from there from time to time, Brent, with you and through the network that we're building as well. But another thing about Nashville too, people are always telling me, and I'm a fledgling musician, an artist, and of course I've gotten into the business side of this to an extent, and I've got a lot to learn, but people are always telling me, why don't you go to Nashville and play at the Bluebird or Tootsie's and get discovered? Now, I said, does that really even happen anymore? I don't know.
Well, I think it happens to an extent, but it's so interesting now because there's so many people that are good at singing,
right?
And you got to think, when Granddad and everybody was coming up doing this, it wasn't like the super desired career, right? It was people that absolutely loved it and couldn't do anything else. So I think you've got some glitz and glam that's in the industry today that's the draw for the artist. You know, and you know, look at some of the money involved. Like it's like being a pro baseball player, right? So, you know, back then, and it's funny, I look at some of these settlement slips from these shows at Dewey Grooms or Green Hall or wherever he was playing in Texas, and hell, they'd play a show for $1,100, you know, and that's split between the band and that's fueling the bus and buying the suits. I mean, they weren't getting rich.
All right. Well, and Steve, what Dale's doing with the Midnight Jamboree is so important, especially for young artists who are trying to establish themselves, isn't it?
I think so. Yeah, I think that's great, and we need to see more of that. You know, there's some opportunities to possibly do something like that in Fort Worth, and I don't know if it's an extension of Midnight Jamboree, if that's even possible, or if your folks, Dale, are open to that. But Fort Worth is rapidly becoming the live music, especially for country music, live music capital. You know, of the world. I mean, I don't know if you've been, how long it's been since you've been down to the stockyards, but the place is like Bourbon Street on steroids now. It's crazy down there. And it's just really, especially since COVID, it really has picked up, it seems to me. And maybe I just hadn't paid attention to it lately, but I mean, that place, you can go down there right now at 11 o'clock in the morning and there'll be wall-to-wall people down there. It's crazy.
Oh yeah, I went. It's probably been 2 years, but I can't remember the name of the place I went. But it was in the heat of COVID, so a lot of stuff was closed. But there was a couple places just jamming, and I went in, and it was and they were playing a lot of Ray Price. It was the older country, and it's funny. I sat at a bar top table, and there were some people, you know, dancing. It wasn't very crowded, but it was a weeknight too. And I looked to my right, and there was a picture of Granddad, you know, with screwed to the wall, right? So it was cool, man, to see. And, you know, I know he spent a lot of time there, and I don't think there would be, there could definitely be a collaboration, I would think, because if you want a brand to be bigger than just Broadway Nashville, right? And that's what David did by the expansion, and that's what Granddad did with the Jamboree, because you know, people all over the country and the world were listening to 650 AM, right? They were hearing this come live broadcast from the Ernest Tubb record shop. Well, guess where they wanted to go when they came to Nashville? You know, so you know, I think they play kind of hand in hand.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. You know, you hear a lot of the good traditional country music, the stuff that your dad was, your grandfather was playing. You know, you hear a lot of that. The thing about Texas, maybe more so than Tennessee or Nashville, is the fans here. These are dancing. This is a dancing bunch of people. I got to spend the afternoon with Vince Gill over at the Ryman Auditorium, and we were interviewing him for a documentary film that my brother is producing for the birth and history of Western swing. And Vince Gill was saying, you know, and he remembers playing in those dance halls and doing a lot of the Western swing stuff and traditional country. And he said, you know, in Texas, how you know the fans like you is not so much by the applause, but by how many are out there dancing, you know. So it's a dancing bunch of people here. And so that's why, you know, we love to play the big dance halls and love the energy coming from the dance floor.
Absolutely. And the Troubadour, you know, when we do the Jamboree, got a really nice dance floor. And it's exciting. You know, I do like that too, because you get a couple people out there spinning and dancing, you know, that the entire energy of the room just elevates.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, before we go any further, I want to stop down for just a second and acknowledge a bunch of folks hanging out here. We got a lot of folks who are jumping on here from all over the country here. Our friend Edward Williams on here. Peggy York, I see on here. Our buddy Billy Bowles out of the Lubbock, Texas area, checking in today. Hey to Billy. We enjoyed having Billy on a couple of weeks ago on the show here. And, of course, Billy, part of the whole connection here, you know, it was actually Glenn Douglas Tubb, who put me in contact with Billy Bowles, who later connected me with Steve Markwart, and you know, through a roundabout way, here we all are. So I'm glad to see Billy on here today, and See Rebecca Rodwell, who was part of the Ernest Tubb Record Shop tradition there, a former employee there at the record shop. Terry LeMaster, one of the great artists with Clarksville Creative Sound on there. And I also see checking in our friend Marcia Campbell, who is a good get for the Midnite Jamboree, hosts the pre-show for the Midnite Jamboree. So it's awesome to see Marcia on here tonight. Had fun catching up down there back in November when I had a chance to stop by there and kind of see the revamped Midnite Jamboree. And it was exciting for me. We had an artist we were working with, Bree Carter, that night, and a couple of other artists on that bill that night. Also, Scott Haggard was there carrying on the legacy of the Hag. And that was the night Buddy Jewell actually played the Midnite Jamboree just after that. So it was cool to see Buddy there as well. Also that night, the thing that struck me was kind of place to see and be seen. Our friend CJ Garton was there that night, who has got a great career going for himself. Also wrote a bit for our friend Wade Jennings, who has a birthday today. So the grandson of the great Waylon Jennings, happy birthday to my friend Way, who sings the theme song for my show, Tractors and Troubadours, each week. Exciting to hook up with CJ while we were there. Also, Jimmy Bowen we ran into while we were there. Of course, he's been recording a show out of the Midnite Jamboree facilities there too, and doing great work with interviewing artists as well. So a lot going on there with the Midnite Jamboree, and it's cool to see that reinvigoration going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something Nashville and I think country music needs. I feel like everything's gone, and mainstream is, Granddad was an envisioner, right? Like he would have evolved with times, in my opinion. May not have understood it, but I think that he knew how to run a business. He knew how to keep an audience's attention, and that's really what. I think we're at a crossroads in music, and you look at, when I look at Granddad's music, and then you roll into the generation of Willie and Johnny Cash and, Hank Jr., that was a Southern rock era, Charlie Daniels. Mm. And then you roll into the George Straits and the Alan Jacksons and, I call it the 80s, 90s era. And then you got the Kenny Chesneys of the 2000s, and then you've got a couple of those 80s icons that, wrote their ticket right for 30, 40 years. George Strait, Alan Jackson did amazing things for the business. But when you listen to them sing, their roots are Granddad, Hank, Lefty, George Jones. It's really interesting just to, even if you just listen to the layout of the songs or the fact that they're telling a real life story. You look at the word troubadour, right? Singing poet. Right. That's what they're doing.
Yeah, and your grandfather started out, of course, he was emulating in the early days Jimmy Rogers. He was, from what I understand, a huge, huge fan. In fact, gigantic fan of Jimmy Rogers. And I think I heard a story in that documentary where Jimmy Rogers' widow finally reached out to him and said, you're doing a great job of reminding everybody about Jimmy Rogers, but it's time to be Ernest Tubb, but he had a lot, that was a major influence of him. And I can hear influences with your grandfather also from the Bob Wills type genre as well. He took some of the swing beats and did them in open chords, but the fact that he calls out the band members, which I love, it's always great to actually put a name on the people that are playing behind you, and he always did that too. In most of his recordings, you could hear him calling out, "Here's Leon," that kind of thing, and that was kind of what Bob Wills kind of made famous. 10 years prior to that when he got his start, and of course, so yeah, I mean everything. I think the music lovers, we should all be musical expeditionaries. I know when I find something I like and discover a new artist or get onto a new artist, I want to go as far back as I can to see what their influences are. And that's what's so fascinating. That's why I love albums too, and all the liner notes, because you can't get that on digital downloads.
Yeah, and you go back to the legacy of Granddad and what got him into it. I would say a Jimmy Rogers fan would be an understatement.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember reading something somewhere where he had reached out to Carrie, but he was scared to go because he didn't want to meet Jimmy because he was afraid, he had him on such a high pedestal. Then after he passed, he got in touch with Carrie. And to be quite honest, I mean, Carrie was a huge reason that Granddad broke through. She helped orchestrate that first contract with Bluebird, which rolled through into Decca, which is where he spent the majority of his career. But if you look at, she loaned him his Jimmy's guitar. She gave him Jimmy's Hamilton watch. I mean, I've got a hat show print that it's actually I'm reading it. It's 2 Victor recording artists. Miss Jimmy Rogers was at the top, and then it says in person Ernest Tubb playing Jimmy Rogers' own guitar. Wow. And Granddad's in a tuxedo. So you look at the evolution of him. I mean, she loaned him that guitar, which I believe in that Meridian Jimmy Rogers Museum. Granddad donated it down to the museum. It's at 00045. But it's, again, that was one of those things. You hear that he asked Carrie, how can I ever repay you? And she said, extend the helping hand to other artists, keep it going. And he spent his entire life doing that. I'd say he kept his promise to her,
Kind of hard to see here, but if you look closely, this photo from the Carnegie Hall appearance, he's actually holding that Jimmy Rogers guitar. So he made good and took it all the way to the stage at Carnegie Hall. That's pretty exciting.
Absolutely.
Well, we talk about legacy, and this show represents a kind of a full circle moment for me. As I was saying earlier, I was involved with Glenn Douglas Tubb and kind of helping to preserve some of this legacy. And one of the things that I know he was really passionate about was working to bring a statue of the Texas Troubadour to the stockyards in Fort Worth. And one of my greatest regrets in life, as I live and breathe here, is that we were never able to make that happen in Glenn's lifetime. He went to his heavenly reward here. It'll be 2 years this coming June. And one of the things that's really been on my heart since his passing is to see that project to completion. Not only because it was something we were passionate about, but because this is a man who in the early days of country music carried the Texas brand far and wide. And I believe that deserves recognition in the place where it all began here. As Steve points out, it is quickly becoming one of the hottest live music destinations in the world. So to that end, I wanted to throw out there that we're going to be reviving that statue project with the help of Steve and some of our friends in the Fort Worth area and beyond. And we're not to the point yet where we're soliciting donations or anything like that. We're still trying to figure out what all that looks like. But make sure you stay tuned to the socials, and as we move forward here, we'll have more on that. But I know that was something that Glenn was really passionate about. Pop up a picture of Glenn here so you can all, if you don't know him, see who I'm talking about here. But I know he wanted something that looks similar to what's behind David McCormick and I here in this photo here, which is the iconic statue in the record shop on Broadway. And nothing would please me more than to see that project come to completion.
Yeah, that would be awesome. So, I think there's definitely a place there for it.
So stay tuned. Stay tuned for that.
In our affiliated portal, Larry O'Neill, who allowed us to come on and do this show through his Fort Worth Memories portal, but he's got over 150,000 members. And Larry, no better guy to help us mobilize to get this thing done and bring it home than Larry O'Neill and all the army of folks that follow Fort Worth Memories and are jumping on to Fort Worth Musical Moments. So I think we have a very, very extremely good chance of getting that done through those folks and other folks that we all know. And so it's something that I'm becoming more and more passionate about, as we talk about it. I think it's the time is right, So if Larry's watching, I challenge Larry to mobilize the troops and let's get together and see how we can make this happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I tell you what.
Yeah. Steve, keep me in the loop on, I'd like to be on the loop on that and do any heavy lifting that we can help with.
Absolutely.
Well, listen, the Tubb family's been good to me, and David McCormick's been good to me. I did 105 episodes of my previous show at the record shop as my home base, and had many great conversations with Glenn over the years. And I saw how hard he worked to keep that legacy alive. And in fact, I don't think I ever had a conversation with him where he didn't refer to Uncle Ernest. So I know that passion there. And man, I love seeing you carry on that legacy. I know it's a lot to bear at times, especially with a wife and young kids and a full-time job of your own here. That's asking a lot of anybody, but please know that you have allies right here in this bunch who are always willing to jump in and help where we can, because it's important that legacy is shared for generations to come.
Absolutely. Certainly appreciate it.
Well,
and you've got an open invitation next time you're down this way, Fort Worth area. Please, let's get together, and love to show you kind of what we're doing. And of course, visit our studio there in Clarksville, Tennessee as well. We'd love to have you out there and see what's going on there. There's lots of really exciting things happening.
Awesome. That sounds super cool.
Well, Dale, thank you so much for taking the time to join us, man. I hope you'll come back and give us updates on how things are going with the Midnite Jamboree and the record shop property and everything else you got going on.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll keep you. Maybe this will be our avenue to the masses, right?
I would love that. I would love nothing more than to continue these chats here regularly and keep that out there and just keep this legacy going. And Steve, man, a great hour here.
Yeah, I'm going to say something really corny, but Dale, thanks a lot.
I love it.
Y'all are welcome, man. I appreciate the positive vibes and the support. I think it's exactly what this project needs.
Well, I tell you what, it does my heart good, man. I'm just glad to see this legacy carried on. And Steve, before we get out of here, man, what's the latest from the Clarksville Creative Sound Camp? You mentioned them. I know Kurt Ryle is working hard and has got a lot going on here with artists he's been working on. Eric Diamond in the studio right now recording some great Western swing music and a lot cooking.
Eric's in there now. They've had the musicians in there laying down the music. He's doing the vocals, I think, as we speak. Kurt and Eric sat down and wrote a bunch of original songs. One artist after another. That studio's so busy. Kurt's, we got to get him to take a little breather here, but working on that. But of course, you guys are going to start working on putting together these road story podcasts, or for lack of a better word. So that's something that I think everybody's going to really love, and we're going to try to get those out through our CMA of Texas radio network that's growing rapidly, as we all know. And so we're excited about that. And just lots of cool things going on. We're working on a lot of ideas from live shows, maybe package shows, things like that. So lots of great things happening.
Well, I tell you, it's super exciting to see all that. And I'm excited to sit down with Kurt and start to unpack those road stories. I mean, you talk about a guy who's performed with George Jones, who spent 5 years on the road with Vern Gosdin, who used to work for Mel Tillis and spent time playing for Mel Tillis. I mean, we could get into some stories there, so I can't wait to start them.
He's got so many great stories, but if you're going to be the producer, have your hand on the censor button. There's all great stories. And, you talk about guys like Mel Tillis, what a character he was. Great stories to tell about all those guys, and I think people love to hear that stuff.
Well, everybody knows how I like to nerd out about that stuff, and that's another full circle one for me, because I got into this when I was about 5 years old. My first concert was Mel Tillis, and I remember sitting there like a wide-eyed kid. I can still remember it like it was yesterday, just staring up at that stage and watching he and the Stateside, very much like Ernest Tubb and the Texas Troubadours, a very, very tight band, and just entertainers to the core. So I'm excited to hear Kurt's stories, and I'm excited for the legacy that he's trying to perpetuate, because he was at ground zero for a lot of this with a lot of these really legendary artists. He spent time with Ray Price as well, and and he soaked all that in, and now is really transferring that to a whole generation of young artists that he's producing. So from that standpoint, the legacy is live and well there.
Yeah, he spent a lot of time at the Longhorn Ballroom in Dallas, as we talked about. So he got to cross paths and back up Ernest Tubb and so many other great artists that came through there. I think he met everybody from Ernest Tubb to Mick Jagger came in there one night.
Right.
When he was playing a concert. There's a contrast, right? But and I know you're a Stones fan, so like that. But yeah, Kurt is kind of. I told my brother because I was telling him another story that Kurt had told me, and Mike said, "Man, Kurt has really been around." I said, "Yeah, he's kind of like the Forrest Gump of country music. He's been in the middle of all these major historical events. He traveled a while and watched Dean Dillon write some of his most iconic songs, and so I mean, it's just on and on and on. And Kurt's such a humble guy, and but so talented. What a great musician." He's a fabulous producer, but he's also one of the best musicians I've ever seen. Can do just about anything. So really, really fortunate to have him as a friend and a producer and a guy that can just arrange this music so well.
Well, you talk about Rolling Stones, and that got me to thinking. I know that Mick and Keith would frequent the Ernest Tubb Record Shop whenever they're in town. I mean, they really appreciated the history. You talk about Honky Tonk Women, that kind of was born of Hank Williams. So,
yeah.
Well, exciting stuff there. Well, I hope everybody will stay with us. We do one of these programs each Friday at 10 a.m. Central, and make sure that if you're looking at this on any page other than the Fort Worth Musical Moments group page, that you go and request to join the Fort Worth Musical Moments group so we can continue to grow that group, because that's where we're going to be sharing a lot of this information about all these pieces we're trying to pull together from various areas here, just to kind of keep this musical legacy going. So follow that page, go follow the Clarksville Creative Sound Group page, and also the Rural Strong Media Facebook page, because that's where you're going to be seeing a lot of this content popping up here. Also want to invite you to check out Rural Strong Radio, which is our 24/7 streaming radio station, found at ruralstrongmedia.com, or also the Live 365 streaming radio app. It plays the best in traditional country music, Western swing, and bluegrass, with a little Southern rock and inspirational as well. We've got everything on there. This week we're going to say from Ernest Tubb to Steve Marquardt on there. So how about that, Steve?
That's to be mentioned in one sentence with that name. I'm over the moon.
Well, and I hope at some point you start to see some royalties from that thing, because every time I pull it up, I see another one of your songs playing on there. There was just one a little while ago that popped up. So
pennies are rolling in.
I'm good.
Ask Dale, is there any links that you want to put out there, or any information that you want?
Thank you. I forgot to ask.
Yeah. We've got a new Facebook site, Midnite Jamboree LLC. That's where we're launching all of our intel about the Jamboree, who's playing, upcoming schedules, announcements. So that's something to follow if you want to stay in tune with the record shop and the Midnite Jamboree. And
make sure you're listening Midnight Central on Saturday nights, Sunday mornings to the WSMradio.com, still broadcast to the world. And you can hear the Midnight Jamboree. Make sure you listen to those programs, because if you can't make it to, I know I've done it myself many nights, falling asleep to listening to the Jamboree. If you can't make it there in person, and if you do get to Music Valley and to Nashville, Tennessee, make sure you go and check out the Midnight Jamboree. It's such a fun experience, and I can vouch for it since I've been there, since the new regime has taken over. The pizza there is really good, so make sure you go and get you a burger, some pizza, some chicken wings, and just have some fun here. And at the end of the day, Dale, that's what all this is about, isn't it? Just having some fun.
Absolutely.
So make sure you go and do that. And I also want to remind you a couple things on Rural Strong Radio on Sundays, beginning at 9 a.m. Central. We feature 2 great programs coming out of Texas. First, from Vidor to the World, it's Robbie Lynn with Sundays Kind of Country. He plays almost 3 hours of great inspirational country music from legendary artists and independents, and just a great way to fill your soul and get the week started. And I always fill that at the end of it about 11:45 a.m. Central for 15 minutes going into the next program. We do a short set of music. And hey, this week, how about we play some inspirational music from Ernest Tubb? We'll have some great inspirational music from Ernest, and you can go check that out. Again, that'll start 9 a.m. Central on Sundays. Then at noon Central, 1 Eastern, Billy Bowles Swinging Country from sundown to your town. We've got 2 hours of great Western swing and traditional country music. Billy lines up just an amazing show. I'm always amazed at how much, Steve, he can pack into 2 hours worth of programming.
Very well thought out. I mean, he spends all week putting these things together, and a lot of hours goes into the planning. He's always got a good theme going, and he has a lot of great artists. He does his radio premieres. He's been really good to me and so many other independent artists. He was the first guy to play my music, and I'm grateful for that.
So be sure to check in for Sundays Kind of Country with Robbie Lynn, and then stick around for Billy Bowles Swinging Country. And I tell you what, the fun doesn't stop, does it, Dale?
No, I got all the kids at home, so
well, I want to.
They're beating on the door.
I want to tell everybody that's watching, listening, or whatever, to reach out to our page for Fort Worth Musical Moments, as well as the Fort Worth Memories to Larry O'Neill,
right,
and just let us know that you say, hey, I want to help with the statue project. Let's get that thing mobilized and bring it home. The Ernest Tubb statue in the stockyards.
Absolutely. Boy, nothing would make me more excited. I can't tell you how many times I've thought about that over the last few years, even before Glenn passed, that we get that thing done here. And now that it feels like the stars are starting to align with that a little bit. So I sure hope that we can bring that thing home. Well, I tell you what, gentlemen, it's time for us to get on out of here. Again, thank you so much to our guest Dale Tubb for stopping by and sharing recollections of his grandfather and talk of the legacy that he continues to carry forward. And I hope you join us again next Friday, 10 a.m. Central, for Fort Worth Musical Moments. The show automatically archives, so if you miss it live, you can catch it on demand immediately following the live stream. Until next Friday, keep riding tall in the saddle, and make sure that you have a great week. You've been watching Fort Worth Musical Moments, a production of Rural Strong Media, copyright 2023. Please join the Fort Worth Musical Moments Facebook group and join us each Friday at 10 a.m. Central as we introduce you to another key figure in Fort Worth's musical heritage.